My name is Deanna Helsher, and I am Director of the Michael and Susan Dell Center for Healthy Living, and I'm really glad to see you all here this afternoon. We're really fortunate to hear from our speaker, Dr. Diane Stanton-Ward. She really has a wealth of experience to share about how we can make our younger children healthier. So sit back and enjoy the next hour. So first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Aliyah Husseini and her colleagues at the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation for their support of this event. If you could join me in a round of applause for We have two members of the foundation here with us today, TJ Moen and Aaron Crump. So again, thank you for this generous donation, which has allowed us to bring Dr. Ward here. I'd also like to recognize the leadership of the center and all the people who've made this happen. So Dr. Alexandra Van Berg, Dr. Steve Kelder, Dr. Cheryl Perry, Dr. Bill Cole, Tiffany Menendez, Julie Latcham, Harold Flanoy, Veronica Rodriguez, Kate Neal, Kelsey Heron, Rachel Linton, Pam Greer, Amelia McClellan, and a number of volunteers. So if you could stand and be recognized. I would also like to take a moment to thank Congressman Doggett, Lloyd Doggett's wife, Libby Doggett, for being here today. Thank you very much. We really appreciate the work that he's done on behalf of children. As I mentioned earlier, we're pleased to honor Dr. Ward for her work on preventing childhood obesity through home, school, and community interventions that promote healthy eating and active living in children and their families. So at this time, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping details. So first of all, make sure your cell phones are silenced. So if you could turn them off now. Also, please refrain from flash photography. Secondly, today we will have an opportunity to ask questions of Dr. Ward after her lecture. So we will select some key questions from the audience, but you can also text your questions to, or tweet your questions, to hashtag MSD lecture. So tweet them. And if you look up there, it also shows you the network code, so you can connect to the internet here. We will also have microphones available in case you want to ask your question instead. Thirdly, as we continue celebrating this year's lectureship, since we espouse healthy eating and active living, we ask that you participate in active applause. So whenever you applaud, you should stand up, and so it'll get you a little bit of physical activity while you're here. So we can practice now. So everybody. You have Jim Salas to thank for that. Finally, we have a nursing room available at the Blanton. Please see one of our volunteers if you need assistance. And so it's sponsored by Texas Mother Friendly Worksite, which is one of our projects here at the center. Now then, I'm honored to introduce Dr. Sandra Vandenberg, Professor of Health Promotion and Behavioral Sciences and Associate Director of the Michael and Susan Dell Center for Healthy Living. She will introduce Dr. Ward. Dr. Vandenberg.
I don't think I've ever had. Well, thank you, Dr. Helsher. As mentioned earlier, we are very excited to have Dr. Ward here as our keynote speaker today. And Dr. Ward is a professor of nutrition at the University of North Carolina, Gillings School of Public Health. UNC Children's Healthy Weight Research Group is dedicated to creating, testing, and disseminating programs and policies that improve the health and the well-being of children and their families through healthy nutrition and physical activity. With over 30 years of experience in childhood obesity prevention and physical activity promotion, we are eager to learn from her research and expertise in this field. Dr. Ward, serving as the principal investigator, and her team developed the Nutrition and Physical Activity Self-Assessment for Childcare, or NAPSACC, the highly regarded policy and environmental intervention for childcare, which has been recognized as a model program and adopted by many states and communities. And I just want to add, it's like the best acronym, right? But her team didn't stop there, but developed a second generation of the NAPSACC called the GO NAPSACC, an online interactive version of the original program. Throughout her career, Dr. Ward has been the principal investigator or the co-investigator for multiple grants funded by the NIH, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the Kellogg Foundation, and the Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina Foundation. She has published more than 200 papers and a book on physical activity intervention for children. As most of you know, the prevention of childhood obesity is a primary focus of the Center through our research and a variety of projects. As noble as this work is, it makes a bigger impact when we work together and learn from each other. So let's all take this opportunity to learn something new and meaningful today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Diane Ward to the stage.
You're okay? Well, it's wonderful to get a standing ovation at the beginning. So in case I don't get one at the end, I know I've already been well received. Thank you, Sandra, for a lovely introduction. And for the invitation to come here. I have been so excited at this opportunity. I was asked several months ago, so I've had plenty of time to think about it. And, you know, as I was thinking about it, and I was really overwhelmed with this opportunity because coming to Texas is a big deal. You know, it's kind of like going to a foreign country because it's really big and it's very diverse. It's got a lot of history and it's got a lot of presence. It made me feel a little anxiety about, you know, how it was going to be when I came. And I continued to think about it, and I was sort of musing about Texas. And it occurred to me that my first experience with Texas was an unusual one. And it involved a calf and a lasso and some clothes, and it wasn't really good. If Rose is in here, this was the AFER convention, and I was selected as a volunteer to lasso the calf and put the clothes on. Probably wouldn't be well received today in animal kindness. But I also thought about another happy memory, not that that was an unhappy memory, but it was more shameful memory. But I had another memory, and this was a vicarious memory. And this is a picture of my folks and my sister. And my sister came to Dallas, Texas, and participated in the National Chicken Cooking Contest. She was the South Carolina representative, and although her peanut butter chicken, Mandarin chicken salad did not win top prize, I did get a lovely scar for the chicken cooking contest, and I will happily share that recipe with any of you. And my sister asked me, did I want to make copies? So I said, no sis, I think I'll just let them ask for it. So getting down to business here. I also want to do one thing, and I'm going to try really hard during the talk. We in the biz are trying to talk about child care as early care and education because it deserves to be referred to in the way that it really is. Because when children are cared for outside of their family home, it is both care and education. And I think it's an effort to start to professionalize this setting as well. So what I want to talk about in my time here is a little bit about healthy behaviors and the importance of good nutrition and physical activity. Why ECE is an important setting to target healthy behaviors, and then talk about how we might improve the quality of these environments at early care settings. But I'm going to only have time to talk about policy and organizational opportunities. And then I'm going to end up talking about some emerging opportunities that I'd like to invite you to think about as you go along in your work. I think everyone's pretty clear that nutrition is important for young children in their development. We know that they need macro and micronutrients because it contributes to the growth of organ systems. We also know that early quality nutrition is associated with later cognitive outcomes. And so therefore it's exceedingly important during the early years for nutrition to be of a high quality. It's also important for children to create habits when they are young, because we know that habits do tend to track into childhood and and beyond. And it's also an opportunity to begin a healthy relationship with food. Physical activity, sometimes not as well recognized as nutrition as its importance in early childhood, and yet studies are clear that there is a link between early physical activity and motor development, fitness and cardiometabolic health, bone and skeletal health, as well as psychosocial development. And it needs to be of a variety of types, moderate to vigorous, as well as the entire amount of activity. So why do we focus on ECE settings? Well, in the United States, more than 60%, in fact, I saw an updated statistic of 73% on a slide earlier, of the children who are in care or in out-of-home care or in child care centers. But about 1.5 million children are cared for in family homes. And this is a small business where a person, usually a woman, cares for a small number of children in her home as a business enterprise. Children who are in ECE spend a good bit of time there. It's 32 hours. And we've learned from research that interventions set in this setting can affect physical activity, nutrition practices, and the rate of BMI increase. Within childcare, or within the ECE setting, children consume about half, as many as 3/4 of all of their daily calories in that setting. And although the data aren't, there's not clear data on this, I estimate that for many children, this is their main source of daily physical activity during the time that they are enrolled in the program. And I think an underappreciated aspect of the ECE setting is the role they play with educating families. It's an important source of information on raising healthy children. Well, what's going on in terms of the healthy behaviors in the ECE settings? From our research, we see that diet quality is not so good. We've conducted a number of studies within North Carolina, and I really hope things are better here in Texas. I want to talk about North Carolina. So using the Healthy Eating Index, So if you're not familiar with that, it's a way that you can actually, it's an NCI, National Cancer Institute instrument that sort of puts together the meal pattern and the meal components into a quality rating. So we did direct observation of what children were served and what the children consumed in both a large number of centers and family homes. Our center research was a few years ago, so maybe these centers are a little better today. Family child care was just recently. But in both cases, we found the HEI score was less than 60. The max score for HEI is 100, and a good target is 80. So we've got a way to go. And interestingly, in these family child care data that we collected, almost all of them were in the child and adult food care program. We've also seen, by looking at breaking down the HEI into the components of the diet, we found that 13% were meeting recommendations for whole grains, 7% for dark green vegetables, and a high percent of the meats were fried or high fat. There have been changes, positive changes in the CACFP meal pattern that were implemented in October, and we hope this will help, but we think that more work is needed in terms of diet quality. In terms of physical activity, interestingly, we really don't have a metric for physical activity quality. We have one for amount of physical activity. So if we look at amount of physical activity, studies have shown that the variation in how active a child is, about 40 or 50% of that variability can be attributed to the child care program, the ECE program that they're enrolled. A later study validated that in 2- and 3-year-olds. We did a study with 84 child care centers across North Carolina and found that those centers with higher quality environments resulted in children who were more active. I thought you might be interested in this graph. Just sort of look at the pattern, not necessarily those numbers. But this is a study, we call it the 50 center study. So we went into 50 child care centers in North Carolina, and we were there for 4 days. And we did activity monitoring using accelerometry with the children for each of those 4 days. We also did direct observation during those visits, and we assessed about 400 children. And the interesting thing, this is the individual data from the 50 child care centers. And you can see some are lower and some are higher. But if you look at the difference between the low centers and the high centers, in 1 month, the difference is about 8 hours of physical activity. So it can make a difference of what a center does and how active its children are. So that was talking about children's behavior, how active they are, and the quality of the foods that they eat. But I think it's important to focus on what kind of environments they are in, because that may be the determiner of these healthy behaviors. We developed an instrument called the Environment and Policy Observation and Assessment, or Assessment and Observation, EPAO. And it was designed as an observation instrument. We've also adapted it for child care homes as well as centers. And then we have a self-report version. But using variations on this EPAO instrument, we found that in a number of homes, child care homes in Mississippi, that the nutrition score was about 9 out of a max of 21. The physical activity score was 13 out of 30. And in child care centers in Georgia, Kentucky, and Mississippi, we found, again, it's similar, a little bit better, but still not high-quality environment. Scores of 11 out of 18 and about 9 out of 18. We think that we can improve the quality of these environments, but we need to focus on what we call the 3 Ps. Provisions, practices, and policies and professional education. Sometimes I call that the 4 Ps, but it's really the, we'll talk about it as the 3 Ps. In order to talk about environmental change, and as I said, this is one of the areas that I wanted to talk with you about today. I want us to look at something that's very familiar to most people, the social ecologic model, because we know that there are a variety of influences that influence human behavior. And I'm going to talk today really about these upstream influences. We can certainly talk about downstream, but I'm going to talk about the upstream influences. I want to start out by talking about public policy opportunities. Let me share a visual with you, and this is a recent production led by the CDC and Meredith Reynolds to look at opportunities that we can address the ECE program, and different avenues that we can enter the space for possible improvement. But what I wanted to share with you, and I should have probably not done that yet, are the outer bands. So there's 2 outer circles in this visual, and these, I'm going to talk a little more about what's inside, but I want you to look at the bands on the outside. The first one is partnerships. And I really want to stress that, and I've been so impressed by the people that I've met and what I've heard about the work going on here in the Dell Center and in the state of Texas about the number of partnerships that are being forged, because I think this is one of the ways that we're really going to make a difference is working together. Child care is pretty fractionalized as an industry. It's not like a school system. It's not orderly. It has a lot of parts that differ state to state, but partnerships is a common uniter. And so we need to think about how we might build partnerships for change. And the second thing to draw attention to is the inner band of equity. And I think it's really important, and I've begun to think more about this than I ever have. I think I gave it lip service, but not really understanding what that meant. I think in this case, we want to make sure that we address equity and don't increase disparities by some of the things we do, by focusing on a certain segment that really elevates that segment and really increases the distance. So we need to look at an equity lens. So within the opportunities, there are a number of areas that one might enter into and address improvements in ECE. So I'm going to look at those by mandatory, thinking about where one could work. So one could work at licensing. There is probably, I don't know all of the data in all of the states, but I'm guessing every state has something relative to licensing. And how they license and who they license varies state to state. But one way that you can help promote healthy practices is have some licensing standards. But it's a cautionary tale because you don't want to regulate an industry out of business so that they cannot provide for the community. So you can't put everything in a licensing ordinance. There may be pre-service or in-service mandatory requirements. Again, it depends on the state, but this would be one way that one could try to affect change. And there may be other requirements based on state legislation. But there's also optional strategies. One optional strategy is a quality rating improvement system. Texas has the Rising Stars. And this is a way, I kind of call this a carrot approach. It's like trying to entice people to do better. But this is one of those areas where you might contribute to health disparities because some of the efforts to get increased quality may take effort that other programs can't provide. So I think there needs to be working together to make sure that QIRS elevates all programs. There is in-service teacher training that is optional. With the refunding of the Child Care Development Block Grant that was recently passed, there are a number of mandatory trainings for ECE. I don't know what Texas did, but in North Carolina, nutrition and physical activity were considered optional. They're in the ordinance, but it's an optional one. There's also the availability of technical assistance provisions. I saw that Texas has TACRA, which is the TA Association of Child Care Resource and Referral Agencies. And so that's a good resource that provides enhanced quality and could work in the area of healthy practices. And then last would be statewide efforts to try to install evidence-based practices for healthy behaviors. Again, these are optional approaches. One of the approaches policy approaches I wanted to highlight is the Child and Adult Food Care Program. And this is a food assistance program that operates in the ECE setting that tries to support food provision for children and families who qualify based on income. And I want to share, one of my analysts that works with me is very interested in facilitating increased involvement in the CACF program. And he estimated that, well, we saw the data that in North Carolina, we spend about $63 less per child than the average of CACFP state. And so he did a little estimate, sort of a back of the envelope, if you will, estimating, and he estimated that maybe North Carolina failed to get $17 million of food assistance into the hands of children and families in North Carolina because of their failure to participate fully in the CACFP program. And you think, well, why is that? Why is that? Well, it is a governmental program, and by nature, it's full of red tape and it's burdensome. There are a lot of regulations, and the centers may not have the capacity to do what they need to work in this area. They also may be unable to attend midday trainings, which are required because their staffing may require that they cannot attend. There's lack of clarity about do they qualify, how do they do it, and then it may be difficult getting parents to do what they need to do for the paperwork. But there are solutions. We've started working with Child Care Aware to identify food deserts in North Carolina and a map of where the food deserts are and where child care programs are, and then to look at which child care programs are participating in the CACFP program and to see if we can't reconcile those a little bit. But it's important to say also for our friends who work in the Division of Public Health is that they need assistance as well, because increasing the enrollment in the CACFP takes administrative efforts as well, and so there needs to be some way that we can increase the capacity of the people who supervise and administer that program. At the same time, we're trying to increase engagement in the program. But one way that we can do this is by capturing best practices from other states and learn from each other. So moving from policy to organizational opportunities and the promoting of the uptake of best practices. As I said, the 3 Ps for me describes what goes on within an ECE program. So what do we mean by provisions? Well, provisions is what is given to the child in their enrollment in the program. This would be food and beverages, meals and snacks, but it would also be their physical activity, outdoor spaces. It would be the schedule of events, what's actually offered to the child. And through the provisions, we have a chance for children to try new things and to practice skills. But they also learn by interacting with the adults around them, parents, but also these caregivers within the ECE programs. Their actions and their words influence what children think is good or bad, and it helps them build skills and confidence. And then lastly, policies, which for me is a public statement of what the provisions and the practices are that we have in our ECE programs. And it is these rules and structures that shape and guide the everyday activity within the ECE program. So we've been working, as Sandra said, we developed a number of years ago the NAPSACC program. And at this point, our work is in dissemination. We are trying to push out and expose as many children, family, child care providers, consultants, states, and others to this opportunity. We started in 2000, and it really wasn't a brainchild that I had. It wasn't like one day I thought, oh, I'm going to think of this wonderful program. No, we had an opportunity. I was working, I hadn't been at UNC very long, and North Carolina received one of the first childhood obesity grants that went to the health department. We were one of 5 states. And the deliverable was a state plan and a pilot program. And we had colleagues in child nutrition over in the state health department, and they had this idea that if you started with some kind of self-assessment, then you could apply some technical assistance, and then you could move these ECE programs along. So they gave us that kernel of an idea, and from that, we developed the NAPSACC program. You can see by the evolution of our logo that we had a startup period of about 7 years, and then in 2012, we had a step change that I'll explain in a minute. Well, what is this thing called NAPSACC? It's not a curriculum. It's really a change management program. It's a strategy for disseminating best practices for healthy eating and physical activity to children who are enrolled in ECE programs. As I said, it's a change management, so we're trying to help the organization affect change. But because we know that child care cannot undertake serious, rapid, involved change, it's a small steps approach. So we start where people are and try to move them to the next level. So it's based on continuous quality improvement. So it's sort of a cycle of actions. It uses technical assistance and coaching by a third party. That might be a resource and referral agent. It might be a dietitian. It might be a health educator. It could be a child care health consultant. There's so many different variations. It could be a corporate extension agent. There are a lot of different entities who can undertake the TA for ECE. So we actually have this evolution of 1.0 and 2.0. We originally designed our work to focus on 2 to 5-year-olds in child care centers. And where we started was with the available research and all the national recommendations. So we aggregated. It took about a year and a half. We aggregated all the national recommendations that had anything to do with nutrition and physical activity. We looked and reviewed all the existing research that talked about influencing the young child's physical activity and nutrition. We engaged a lot of experts and the child care providers themselves to come up with the best practices. We had 55 best practices in our first iteration. We did a pilot test with 18 child care centers, and then we followed up later with a randomized controlled trial later. And we found in both cases that we were able to make small but measurable changes in the quality of the environments in ECE programs. We had better luck in nutrition. Physical activity has been a little bit of a struggle, but we made positive changes. They just weren't as great as nutrition. In 2012, we expanded our best practices to include birth to age 5 and family child care homes. You just can't take center-based recommendations and say to a child care home, just sort of adapt that. It needs to be personalized to that setting. In terms of our studies that we did with the NAPSACC program, as I said, we did our randomized control trial and showed an effect. This was replicated by Becky Batista in rural centers, by family child care homes in Oregon, by Stuart Tross, with Mark Bonus down in Louisiana, showed significant increases in children's physical activity, and then finally a study by Abby Alcon. And Abby did this study in 3 states, California, Connecticut, and North Carolina. She used for the consultant, the child care help consultant model, and they, this was an in-person NAPSACC experience, and so they worked with centers in these 3 states, and they found that these consultants could be effective change agents for the ECE program, that they were able to increase the knowledge of the child care providers, improve the center policies, and actually lower the amount of children enrolled in the study. So we've been rejoicing and celebrating all of those achievements, but it wasn't enough. It troubled us to realize that there is a lot of need and not a lot of help out in the field. We know that some states don't have child care health consultants. They may have other kinds of consultants. And where you do, we see a caseload in North Carolina where a child care consultant may have a caseload of 100 child care programs. So to do this in person, go visit, spend time, was really time consuming. And we felt like there was a better way, and so we were able to develop a series of online tools to help us. So this is what we now call GO NAP SACC, just to differentiate it from the in-person version. This is a screenshot of our homepage. And this is our vision, is that we think that all children in ECE settings should be nurtured by providers who support them in developing healthy habits, healthy eating, and physical activity habits. So if you look at the right side of the slide, you'll see the 5 boxes. That's the steps in this change model. Assess, plan, take action, learn more, and keep it up. I'll explain those further in just a minute. And on the left side of the slide, these are our content areas. When we did the original NAPSACC, it was nutrition and physical activity and 55 total best practices. When we came out in 2012 with a 2.0 version that we had expanded to 150 best practices in a variety of areas, we added breastfeeding and infant feeding. Then we distinguished then child nutrition, infant and child physical activity, outdoor play and learning, screen time, and then we've recently added 2 additional content modules. Because we were working with our Blue Cross Foundation, there was interest there on oral health. And so we were supported to develop an oral health module. And this is, again, it's not a curriculum, not designed for teaching children. It might include teaching children, but it's really how the whole organizational setting approaches oral health. And then just this month, we released the Farm to ECE module. We were encouraged by the Kellogg Foundation, who has a deep interest in Farm to ECE, and we're working with all the Farm to ECE states, and so we released that module just recently. So these are the steps of NAPSACC. So this is just a screenshot. You can see this is one area within physical activity assessment. This is a time-provided question. And this question asks about preschool children, toddlers, and infants. But if you were a center that only served preschoolers, you would only see the preschool question. Or if you only saw infants and toddlers, you'd only see that question. So it's a tailored question. Once they take a self-assessment, and they don't have to take pieces of it, you get feedback immediately. So you get a feedback that knows what achievements that you've made and areas that you need to work on. The next step, and this is my favorite part of what we did on the website, In the in-person version of NAPSACC, our action planning document was a template. And it sort of was a piece of paper that said name, child care program, date, big block, big block, big block. That was it. Nothing else on it. It left people having to create and invent and think up things. So what we've done for each of the best practices in GoNAPSACC, there is a series of action steps that lead them from the very beginning to the achievement of the best practice. And the other cool thing about this is you don't have to take any of these steps. You can move them around online. You can write, there's a pencil there, you can actually write another step. So you can personalize this. Now this would be done with a consultant. Usually, it's not that a child care provider could not do this and a director couldn't do this, but it's usually an encouragement by a third party. There's also a line in there for them to put in, I need to have a team meeting before we do this, or I need to get a document, or I need some help from Miss Linda. So that's the action planning. Then we also have a library of resources called Tips and Materials. And what we did here is we basically scanned the U.S. This is why it's wonderful to have undergraduate students, because we put them on looking through every state, looking for quality materials that were free on the topics that we were working in. We also went into Canada as well to look. And so we pulled out, for each best practice, there are a series of tips and materials directly related. And we didn't put too many. And my pet peeve that I said, please do not do this, we don't send anybody to a website to go hunting for something else. We may include some master documents in there, but they're in a special place. If you want to go and look at this deep brochure that's there. But there's things that they can go to associated with this best practice that they're working on. We also have trainings that are available online, and we try to link providers to other trainings. For example, Penn State has this wonderful training center called Better Kid Care, so we have some linkages to those folks. And then finally, the last step is to reassess and celebrate achievements, and then begin the process again. So we were able to do a small evaluation with 33 ECE centers serving mainly rural families. They were randomized into immediate or delayed access to the website. We trained I think we had 3 different counties we were working with, 3 resource and referral TAs on how to use the website. It took them about 90 minutes to do that. And then the child care programs did a pre and a post test using the EPAO, and then we measured change. And we saw medium to large effects in a 4-month period. There was an overall change in the nutrition score and specific improvements in food, beverages, and menus. But importantly, we saw an 80% reduction in the amount of time it took the consultant to implement the NAPSACC program with the child care director and staff. We continued looking at the model. CDC provided some funding for a pilot test, so we selected from those that had applied 5 states to conduct a pilot. And then we just looked at changes in best practices before and after. And so they could pick whatever areas these states wanted to work in. So they were working in these 5 areas before oral health and before farm to ECE. But we saw good changes in every area. Now, granted, child care programs might start and sometimes get distracted and are not able to finish. But in this 4-month period, we did see a large number who were initiating and completing and making progress. And what we estimate that 27 consultants saw 270 programs and it took them about 1 day a month, and they provided improved environments for about 6,000 children. So there's a lot of scale that can happen here. We've been growing GoNAPSACC. Our best practices are currently being used to evaluate the CDC 1305 funding. They're also being used to evaluate the NAMOR's multi-state learning collaboratives. The best practices have been added to Nebraska's QIRS system, and Wisconsin is working to do the same. The province of, in Ontario, the city of Ottawa asked to use the best practices for surveillance work in their ECE programs. And 4 of our 5 state pilot states are continuing, and 2 new states have joined. There's an adaptation being tested right now in the UK and at the University of Bristol. And I have a phone call tomorrow with Australia to look at pilot testing in New South Wales. So some future opportunities that I want any of you students, professionals, looking for new things to do. One area of work is family child care. We just finished an intervention that we developed called Keys to Healthy Child Care Homes. Our goal was to try to change physical activity behaviors and diet quality of children enrolled in these homes. We enrolled about 166 family homes, and they were randomized into our intervention, the Keys intervention, or into a business-only intervention. The 3 components of Keys, one module is on Healthy You, which focuses on the health of the child care provider. The second module is Healthy Home, sort of like a little mini NAPSACC, and then the third is on Healthy Business. And we haven't, this paper is being written right now, so you're seeing some new data. So we found a significant improvement in the diet quality of the children in the study. But we also noticed that there was a lot of loss to follow-up because children, there's a lot of flux in family child care. So it's not that people refused to participate, but they moved on to somewhere else. So we also recruited additional children at post-test and did a cross-sectional analysis. So we were looking at a cross-section at baseline and a cross-section at follow-up, and we found even more robust findings. And consistent with the changes in children, we saw changes in their nutrition environments. Overall nutrition score improved, specifically beverages, feeding environment, and nutrition and educational development. And a real positive benefit were changes in diet quality of the child care family home providers themselves. So that was a real boost. Now the sad news is we were not able to make a significant change in physical activity. We made directional change, but it was quite varied. And I think we needed to do a different kind of work than the intervention had, and so we've got some ideas about how to go back and to address improving physical activity in family child care. The second area of new opportunities is the Toddler program. With the focus on the first 1,000 days in pregnancy and up through 24 months, there's been a new interest in improvement in infant toddler programs. North Carolina right now is offering some grant monies for studies to try to improve infant toddler program. There's a need to train both parents and child care providers in the act of responsive feeding. Many people don't understand what that is. It's not necessarily a simple concept, but it can be, one can be trained to better understand and be more responsive in feeding. We also need more attention to infant motor development and better support for mothers to continue breastfeeding. We do know that, at least in North Carolina, the ECE staff and infant toddler programs are paid, lower paid, and the cost of Those of you who are mothers and have children in infant toddler, you know what I mean. It's more expensive to have infant toddler care than it is to have child care. And so this is an issue, and we think that community partnerships need to be launched to try to support women who need to work and children who need to be in care, but these children need quality care because this is the it is the most important period of a child's development. Third area is in addressing provider health. There are more than 300,000 child care providers in the U.S. Work that has been done by us and here at in this center, we find that the staff have poor health. These are low-income wage earners. The average salary of an ECE staff in North Carolina is $18,000, and in Texas, I looked this up on the websites, $19,000. So these people are, health despair. This is the low-income population in public health that we work on. Yet these are the people who are caring for our children, and they are good people. So I don't want to make any demeaning. I don't want any of my remarks to be taken as demeaning. These are dedicated women and men who love children and do their best, but within constraints. These are the people we ask to be role models and to lead activity and to do nutrition education. It is not clear what impact their own health status is on the health behavior of children. From that key study, we looked at the baseline data of the family child care providers. 1 in 3 did not have health insurance. 90% were overweight or obese. Half of them did not meet guidelines for physical activity, fruit and vegetable intake, or sleep. More than 50% have a high stress score. And if you did a sort of a risk score on these women, half of them had risk scores that were 4, 5, or 6. We've recently finished a study with child care center staff, about 600, nearly 700. 12% were normal weight. On average, they failed to meet national recommendations, fruit and vegetable, physical activity, sleep. But this is the kicker. 36% were at or above the level that indicate clinical depression by depressive symptoms evaluation. The national average is about 7.6. So we have a depressed population working with our children. It is challenging to work with staff, but it's rewarding as well. They don't have a lot of extra time. Many of them work multiple jobs. Their work setting is not flexible because they have to manage children while they're there. It's not like other work sites. The food environment is limited. Sometimes they are allowed to eat the food that is served there, but if the food is not very good, then they're not very good food. But a lot of times they're going out and picking up fast foods and bringing it back into the facility. They have low energy and health problems because they are suffering and struggling a bit. Working with this population, though, can bring big rewards both in their own health and in their work with children and families. There needs to be a conscious effort by our community to look at increasing wages in this population. That may be true in many populations, but I'm advocating for this population. It's going to take all of us working in this area to try to address the ECE program. Probably not once have I given talks about ECE that the first question someone wants to ask is, well, what about those parents? I mean, aren't they really the problem? The vast majority of parents want only the best for their children. It's very clear. And ECE has an opportunity to work and reach out to parents, but we really haven't figured out how to do that. Staff often, so when we do focus groups, staff will say, well, talk to us. I mean, they come in, it's stuff in the backpack, and you just see what they're doing. And this is this is a universal. I was in, when we were in Edinburgh, and Steve were there, there was a researcher from the Netherlands, and she stood up and she had a discovery. Child care staff think parents are the problem. I'm like, this is old news. We all know that. It was funny when we did our first focus groups back in 2000 for NAP SACC, we did with the providers and the parents. It was funny because the providers were saying that same thing, but the parents were saying, you know, we trust these child care programs. They need to provide good food for our kids. They need to provide a lot of activity. So we have a real disconnect between our families and our staff. Partnerships are needed, and there's a difference between just meeting them at the door than having a partnership. If you're familiar with, there's an interesting graphic that Head Start has about family engagement that goes from minimal to maximal, and the maximal is partnerships. So we need to figure out, and this is new and emerging areas. I don't have the answers for us today, but we do need new strategies. The last thing is emerging, and I feel bad when I talk about this because I've done nothing in this area, but I know that this is a need. There are informal care settings where a lot of children are cared for. Well, what is this? These might be family, neighbors, friends, caring for children. Sometimes they are programs that in some states might be licensed, but in one other state they're not licensed. And it may be that in cases where licensing tightens, sometimes these programs go underground. I was working with colleagues in Rhode Island, and when they put their grant in, they estimated that there would be 1,200 available family child care homes in Rhode Island for this study. Between the time the study was put in and the time it was funded, the state made what I think was a relatively minor change. That change was a family child care provider must have a high school diploma or the equivalent. That was the change. They went from 1,200 to 500. Now, nobody believes that 700 programs closed. Nobody believes that. But what they did is they went underground. And I'm not demeaning their going underground. I'm just saying that these are areas that we need to consider that may need our assistance. And getting them to be sort of in some kind of fold is a challenge. And this battery says it's running out of power. Whoops! Hang on. Okay. Let's see if I can speed this up. That may be the way that they're telling me. So, how's that? Okay. So, what's it going to take? Well, it is going to take being better together. We need to build community partnerships in our states and our communities between ECE professionals and the public health community and others who have an interest in the ECE. There are a lot of people who care about this area, but we're not very organized to work together. We also need to consider what public policy opportunities exist, whether that's licensing, QIRS, or uptake of the CACFP. These are areas that have opportunity. We also need statewide interventions, and shameless plug for GO NAP SACC, but there are other ways to go. But we're talking about organizational change and implementing those so that children can have improved environments for where they eat, the activity they receive, and the quality of their healthy environment. And we also need to pay more attention to family child care, toddler programs, staff health, parents in partnership, and alternative care arrangements. And we need one more thing. What's it going to take? It's going to take you. Thank you very much. Here's a lovely picture of all the people who work with me. Join us, friend us on Facebook, go to our website, come visit us. Thank you so much for your attention. I was told to stand away from the mic.
Thank you very much, Diane, for that great talk. I certainly learned a lot, and I have some questions for you. But first off, we're going to take questions from the audience. So if you have a question, please tweet it to #MSDLecture. We've got a couple questions already, or you can come down to, we've got a mic over here. So first question, Diane. In CACFP, is CACFP enrollment associated with higher HEI or EPAO scores? What are your thoughts on updating, well, why don't you answer that first?
Well, I think the research that's out there that doesn't necessarily use HEI for the comparison, but there are a number of studies, and they're pretty consistent that children in CACFP programs have a higher quality of diet. Usually it's components that are measured, but they have a higher quality of diet than children who are not in CACFP programs.
That's similar to what we've seen too in our lunches in the bag program.
And they also have better physical activity, which I'm not exactly sure why that is. But I think maybe they're making an effort, you know, it's indicative of effort. And so they actually have higher physical activity, even though that's not usually a tenet of the CACFP.
Oh, that's interesting. Second question. What are your thoughts on updating ECE licensing standards to meet CACFP standards, but not requiring ECE sites to enroll in the program?
Well, it's interesting. Many states have as their requirement that you follow the CACFP meal pattern. That's in our standard in North Carolina, and it's in many states, but there's not an oversight for that. And I'm not sure that there's effort by any one organization to help them figure out what that means. So it's not that they're all going, oh, they're never going to do that because I don't care. It's just, I think that it's in there as a policy, but there's not a lot of assistance in implementing that policy because the CACFP they're busy implementing it with the official enrollees. And they don't have the capacity to reach out to the non-enrollees.
Yeah, I know here we've had several efforts to reach out to non-enrollees as well at TDA, so they've done a really good job of trying to reach out. But like you said, it's a big population. So one other question I have for you, it's interesting that you're talking about unintended consequences of some of the some of the legislation that you might want to propose. I know one thing that's happened here in Texas that we've seen sometimes is we've seen efforts for food safety get in the way of nutrition. So they want certain kinds of sinks or stoves or things within child centers or daycare homes. And then when you put those into effect, you essentially can't have cut up fruits and vegetables. You have to offer packaged snacks, which is kind of not what we want. So have you seen that? What are strategies to address
Again,
that?
a couple of things we've seen in North Carolina. One is a misunderstanding by our sanitation officers out in the counties who think family child dining is against the law. So, because that's unsanitary. So we've had some of that, so that's a misunderstanding. I think there are issues in the whole sanitation in places that don't have adequate kitchen facilities. And I think one of the answers may be a different direction. I didn't talk about it, but we're doing some work on the concept of central kitchens that can provide meals, creditable meals, CACFP creditable meals, that can be delivered to child care programs. So we have 2 central kitchens in our area, one in Durham, one in Chapel Hill. We're doing some studies. We actually did a kind of a back of the envelope quick study of one in California and our kitchens in North Carolina, and we took 1 month of their menus. So we did not see what they did, but we took 1 month of their menus, and we did an HEI score on those combined 2 central kitchens. And then we had 100 child care programs in North Carolina that we had done an observation using our assessment. And we did an HEI score. And it was higher in the central kitchen than it was in these individual programs. And I think, if you think about it, we're asked, I mean, if you're a big center and you've got a cook, an industrial kitchen, I mean, that's not a problem. They're wonderful things. There's a wonderful chef at one of the child care programs near us. But if you're a mom and pop and you don't have really a great facility and you're trying to, then it's heat and serve, maybe we should help them look for a better way of meal and snack provisions than to actually be the food service when they don't really have the capacity.
So one of the other questions is, I know that at least when my kids were in childcare, and I have to say that was among the hardest decisions. I think it was harder putting them in a childcare facility than it was sending them away to college. Harder in a different way, because you're worried about what goes on with them all the time. I know with my oldest son, we were in a great situation, and one of the things that I really appreciated was the child care provider. She had a master's in child development, and I was very young. I was 25. I'm kind of amazed now when I think back that my son survived. Survived me. But she was really good. She did it in a very nurturing way. She was very much a partner, and she would explain things that he was doing and how I would react to it. So I just wanted to, how would you get something like that going? Because we've done a lot of work similar to that with nutrition, thinking of ways that we could have them as nutrition coaches or physical activity coaches.
We're very interested in this, and you had the benefit of being in a child development center that had highly trained personnel, and for the majority of folks, they can't have that level of achievement, but still. We do believe that there can be linkages from the child care program to the home. I'm always amazed when my children were small how they could get them to do things. They could get them to do things, they could get them to eat things, and then they'd be holy terrorists when they'd come home with me. I wonder what that was about. But I think this goes back to this whole family engagement component, because they do know things, even those who aren't with a master's degree in development. They do know a lot about how to nurture our children. And I think, if we can't figure out a partnership, if we can't figure out how that we can actually bring these two groups together. We're doing a study right now, and I didn't have any data to bring to you, but we actually took, we stacked up the centers that were in our intervention, and we rated them on the most best in terms of family engagement and the worst, and everywhere in between. And we took the top 5 and the bottom 5, and we interviewed the directors, the teachers, and some parents. And it was really interesting, and we learned a lot of things. So what we're finding out is that child care, it's like asking your husband, not asking your husband to clean out, to unload the dishwasher, but expecting him to do it, but not asking him. So there's something like that goes on, is that they expect parents to do things, but then they don't ask them to do anything. And that's going to take effort and training, and it may take more work when we're dealing with someone who hasn't had the benefit of going into an early childhood degree program. But I think it's possible.
Yeah. And that really, I think, would be something great for us to do. So I have another question from the audience. So great speech. What would you recommend in terms of research direction in the ECE sphere?
Well, I just gave you a whole bunch of, I was trying to get people, there's a lot of opportunity, and you can work anywhere from, tightly controlled to implementation. But let me at least give the message to these young researchers. If you start here in the tightly controlled studies, think about how it will ultimately work on the ground. Don't build us something that can't get here, because you're no help to us. You might write your paper, you might graduate, but you're not helping. So be part of a solution. There are so many. We're probably going to see universal pre-K in some of your lifetimes. There's going to be more, maybe not much, but we're going to see that the whole. Steve asked me questions today about media. The whole use of media and screens and child care and what that does. The whole outdoor learning environment, which has barely scratched the surface in outdoor learning environments. Infant toddler. If you were a young researcher and you say, where's the best place for me to go right now, and you're interested in ECE, infant toddler. There's going to be initiatives, there's going to be opportunities, and we don't know stuff. I mean, we know some stuff, but in terms of nutrition and physical activity, I think this is a wonderful area to go in.
Well, even the nutrition guidelines for past a year, I mean, we're kind of a black box
Yep.
for a long period
Yep.
of time.
Yep.
Kind of amazing when you see how detailed they are for
Everybody else.
children. Yes, they just kind of forgot that. So, what about efforts to improve the health of ECE providers? What are some recommendations for research there?
Well, if I tell you my idea, if you promise not to go to the NIH with it and scoop me, so I didn't report our failures, but I will publicly acknowledge it because I'll publish the paper shortly. We did a worksite wellness for center staff. We had around 60 child care programs, and they were randomized into receiving the intervention or receiving a financial help. So we had a wonderful intervention on financial help, which we thought was really useful for this population. And the focus was physical activity, because we thought you don't want to make it weight. Nobody wants to be told that they need that. And we were worried that maybe nutrition wouldn't, but we thought physical activity is a common behavior to a lot of health promotion. It's a weight loss component, it's feel better, it's disease prevention. We didn't move the needle in physical activity. Now, I understand, I haven't seen the data, I understand maybe nutrition did move, but our primary outcome is physical activity. I think we did it wrong. I worked with a woman who's an expert in small worksite wellness. So she's worked in beauty shops and barber shops, and we thought this would be an excellent place to work. But I think there's so many constraints on the child care workers. As I said, multiple jobs, no flexibility there, and physical activity is tough. We had a higher proportion of African Americans, and I think that's another area where it's harder for them to engage in physical activity for a lot of different reasons. I think we need to embark on a community program. And again, it's going to take some effort, but let's say this is your community. You can define it. This is your catchment area. And then let's say you get with the city mothers and fathers or whoever and see if you might get them to work with you on a limited, so that a Y, a fitness center or whatever would give X number of punches So they could only come at low use times. And they'd say, okay, it's Sunday afternoon, it's Saturday night, or whatever. But it would be so that they could engage in community-based activity. And I think that's a good place to start, to try to normalize their physical activity opportunities and engage with other people. So that's one of the ideas, but don't scoop me on that.
So one last question, Carrie.
Okay, thank you so much for coming to Texas and talking to us. I'm Carrie Browning, and I work with the Department of State Health Services, and I've got a million things in my mind to ask you, but two things coming ahead. The first thing is we have a project here called OLAY Texas, which is rolling out to improve outdoor environments in child care centers, and you have a module on outdoor learning, so I'd be interested to hear a little bit about how that's developed, just so all of us can have some understanding of maybe what's in it and what. The second one is this NAPSACC tool. The states, a lot of different states, are using it as part of their funding sources, so I'm curious to hear a little bit about other states' experiences of using NAPSACC, what has actually happened from it. So two big questions.
Well, here's the last one. I actually reported some data from those 5 pilot states, and so we haven't gotten the second year data, but we do have data in the NAPSACC program, so that's the other good thing, is that it actually prints reports and other kinds of things. So they've made really good changes using the online NAPSACC. But again, it takes commitment by the states on the ground. So whoever's on the ground, they have to know how to entice their folks into the programs and to support them into the program. So we are seeing some positives in that area. The first question is, how did we get our best practices? Well, in the outdoor learning area, we did it just like we did everything else. So we go to all of the authoritative bodies, and what do they recommend? Well, there's not a lot in authoritative bodies in terms of the specifics of the outdoor environment. So we had to go to the little bit of research that exists. There's only a little bit of research that says this equals that in terms of physical activity. And then the third thing is that we went to experts. And then we had to take expert opinion that says, okay, you need X amount of shade in order to have a decent outdoor space. You need X number of behavioral spaces so that children can have, you need, one piece of data was clear, you need a pathway. Having a pathway is associated with kids being more active. And so we had to get as much information, and then we tried, all of the NAPSACC components look at provisions, practices, and policy. So all of their, so there are components within outdoor play and learning, there's sections within outdoor, and you can go to the website and pull down all of those best practices. They're available for everybody. There's stuff you can't see because you're not permitted to see it, but you can see a lot of stuff on the front side of that program. You can look at those best practices.
Thank you for letting us be able to go and look.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate your work. Thank you.
Great. And so Diane, we have a little gift for you.
I'm going to turn off my buzzer here so I don't scream.
Okay, thank you for being our awardee for the 2018 Michael and Susan Dell Lectureship in Child Health. And hopefully this will be a very good trip to Texas, and we will give you your own Longhorn to bring home with you.
Thank you. You're wonderful.
And thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. So thank you all for coming. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon. If you could exit through the back, and we've got a healthy reception down in the lobby. And we will be following up with a evaluation. So please fill that out. Thanks very much, and have a good rest of the afternoon. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye, everyone. Bye, everyone. Bye, everyone.